I'm continuing my discussion of the racism of Karl Marx, something that is echoed also in Marx's sidekick or colleague, Engels. And it's a little shocking when you first encounter the magnitude of it, because it's all over the place. It's toward blacks, it's toward Jews, it's toward Hindus, it's toward Mexicans, it's toward all kinds of groups. Here's Engels, for example. He's talking about the defeats by the Europeans of the Asian empires. And he says, quote, that's due to the, quote, superior enterprise of the European race. Marx says that the Hindus suffer from, quote, a natural languor. Languor really here means kind of slothfulness or laziness. And Marx, writing in the Telegraph, I believe, of London, credits colonialism with transforming the Asian economies, including the economy of India. He goes, England has broken down the entire framework of Indian society. And he thinks this is great. He goes, this loss of his old world imparts a particular kind of melancholy to the Hindu. But Marx calls colonialism, quote, a fundamental revolution in the social state of Asia, a positive development that he calls, quote, a regeneration. And there's just a lot of this kind of stuff. Here's Marx, by the way. I mentioned earlier his comments about his own son-in-law, Paul Lafarge. And Marx apparently routinely called him the gorilla. The gorilla's coming over, and so on. Here's Marx referring to his fellow German socialist, a guy named Lassalle, who was apparently very stereotypically Jewish. Marx calls him, quote, the greasy Jew, the little kike, and the Jewish N-word. This is Marx. And now, very interestingly, as I say, the left knows about this, or many of them do. The more intelligent ones do know about this, but they try to hide it. And they try to put forward Marx's letter to Lincoln, Marx's anti-slavery, to cover up Marx and Engels' views of race. When confronted with the views on race directly, what they'll say is, well, you know, Marx, this is the kind of the way Europeans kind of were in the 19th century. Marx, in other words, here is simply reflecting European thought. Now, notice, by the way, that this is an excuse that the left never gives to anybody else. Oh, you know, Jefferson's views are kind of troubling, but he was a man of his time. Let it go. But with Marx, they give him an exemption because, of course, he's the founder of their left-wing ideology. Incidentally, this argument about he was a man of his time doesn't really work. And why? Because there were lots of people in Marx's time who didn't hold those racist views. Here's Marx, by the way, embracing a writer named Pierre Trumeau. Pierre Trumeau apparently thought that he had done a refutation of Darwin, because Darwin talks, for example, about a kind of evolution toward what Darwin called superior races. And this guy Trumeau goes, well, there's also a degeneration occurring in the human type toward more inferior races. And of course, Trumeau here was referring to blacks, referring to Africans. Marx loved it. He says that Trumeau's work is, quote, a very significant advance over Darwin. In other words, Darwin is only describing one type of racial evolution, so you may say upward, but what about the racial evolution downward? Marx embraced Trumeau's ideas on this score. By the way, on the Jewish question, and I may have talked about this before in the podcast, here's Marx. What is the worldly cult of the Jew? In other words, what is the essence of the Jew? He goes, it's not religious. A lot of Jews aren't religious. He goes, what's their real religion? Quote, money. He goes, they're haggling. That is their worldly god, money. And he goes, essentially, that emancipation from haggling and money is the true emancipation that we need from Judaism. So it's not just a matter of getting rid of the Jewish Old Testament God. We've got to get rid of this money-grubbing behavior that is characteristic of the Jews. Notice here that Marx is identifying the Jews with capitalism. So we can sum up here, and here's a scholarly article that sums it up. And I'm just going to read the conclusion because I think it gives a pretty good summary of Marx's views and Engels on the race matter. Marx and Engels were endowing races with inferior and superior qualities all the time. Whites were more intelligent than blacks, Aryans and Semites more capable than other races, the South Slavs were lacking in the innate energies and thrust displayed by the Magyars and the Germans, whereas the Americans could, the Mexicans could not economically develop California, while the English industrial and colonial triumphs were partly due to the innate character of that nation. The Asians were defeated because they lacked the entrepreneurial spirit of the European races. and so on. I like that "and so on" because the author is sort of letting on that there's a lot more in this vein. The founders of leftism and socialism, far from being enlightened champions of equality, were in fact irredeemable bigots. And that strain of bigotry, this is my point, passes through the left, it separately passes through the Democratic Party, and then converges today in the modern Democratic left.